There has never been a standoff, feud, divorce, implosion, pick your word, quite like this. Billionaire versus billionaire, social media giant versus social media giant, social media owner versus owner, both of them experts, commanding attention on and offline. An opinion writer for the Washington Post says the Donald Trump-Elon Musk bromance was always doomed to fail. Quote, no relationship has room for more than one narcissist. This fact alone was probably terminal for the Trump-Musk marriage, but it did not help that the two billionaires are so much alike. Effective teams have complementary traits, not redundant ones. While Trump and Musk both specialize in bellicose social media, share flitting attention spans, and are standouts at shamelessness. But David Von Drehle, what do you really think? Well, as a soap opera, this has been a ratings bonanza, but the real world implications are enormous. What kind of influence could Elon Musk wield politically, especially with the midterms not as far off as we may think, and also in the tech world, which is now a powerhouse in the donor game? NBC's Ryan Nobles joins us with his Capitol Hill reporting. I also want to bring in senior advisor to the Lincoln Project, Stuart Stevens, and here with me is Wired Senior's writer, Jack LaHutte. Okay, so, Jake, the internet went nuts. Group chats exploded. Everywhere I went, I overheard people talking about it, including the grocery store. Everyone's talking about this feud, right? If Musk is now out of that inner circle in the White House, is he open for political business elsewhere?
Well, that is a hot topic among my sources right now. I think the future of America PAC, if we just limit it to that with his outside spending, is pretty unclear. It right now only has about $2.2-ish million in cash on hand. And I think the speculation and the concern is, frankly, Elon could cause a lot more problems for incumbent members of Congress. And then it gets trickier with like who has the leverage between Elon and Trump. But if you're just your rank and file Republican right now looking at re-election in 2026, I don't think you love the prospect of America PAC bombarding you with ads, even if the Trump endorsement and the Trump alignment isn't part of that equation.
And we know big tech leaders threw billions behind Trump in the last election cycle, other candidates. How much weight does Elon Musk's voice carry there now?
Well, I think it's getting trickier, and this is actually indicative of one, I would say, a power vacuum that's going to be brewing going into 2028, and then some slight fissures and splintering going on with the Silicon Valley wing of the GOP, where a lot of these folks who got on the Trump train, most of whom were after the assassination and after, the assassination attempt. And after Elon Musk endorsed Trump on the day of, they had maybe some limited areas of agreement with Trump, usually crypto or various forms of deregulation. So now those folks are being forced to effectively pick sides, and that is true both for members of Congress and also for tech executives and billionaires in Silicon Valley.
So, Ryan, let's remember what blew all this up, right? Trump's mega bill that Musk then called a disgusting abomination. I think it was like just 3 or 4 days ago, feels like a year ago. What's the sense on the Hill right now after Musk threatened to challenge anyone who votes for this bill? Are members of Congress worried?
I wouldn't say they're worried today, Chris. And I think that when they're making a short-term calculation, their short-term calculation is that they need to be with Donald Trump right now, especially given the fact that Elon Musk tends to be all over the map, especially when it comes to his politics. And there's no telling that the kind of vacuum that he finds himself in today will be the same one that he's in as we get closer to these 2026 midterms. I think they're very mindful of the fact that he could get involved in some of these primaries, but they just need to get over this hill that's in front of them right now. And this is that big bill that they need to pass that really will largely be the foundation of the Trump legacy and the Trump administration going forward. Listen to how Speaker Mike Johnson explained the dynamics that he and his conference find themselves in.
Elon was a big contributor in the last election, but this was a whole team effort. I mean, President Trump is the most consequential political figure of his generation, of modern American history. He is the one responsible for that. But we all worked hard. We delivered the House majority. I traveled the country nonstop. I did over 360 campaign events in 250 cities and 40 states, and I logged enough miles last year to circle the globe 5.5 times. I mean, I contributed to it as well. All of our House Republicans did.
So the message there from Mike Johnson is that Elon Musk alone is not enough to derail the Republican hopes of holding on to the House of Representatives and the Senate, for that matter. But when you take a look at the margins, Chris, and it's only 3 seats right now, and under the current environment that Republicans find themselves in, there is very little room for error. So if Elon Musk decides to get involved in just 4 or 5, maybe 10 different House races where he provides a lot of grief for incumbent House Republicans, that could be the difference between winning or losing the majority in the 2026 elections. Right now, though, it's just too difficult to predict.
Yeah, Stuart, where some Republicans maybe see a threat, Democrats do sense an opening. Politico puts it this way: Democrats eye a villain to ally arc for Elon Musk. I mean, what would that even look like? And would voters buy it?
No, I don't think anybody wants to be near Elon Musk. I mean, 48 hours ago, he was one of the most toxic figures in American life. He had some support among MAGA and Trump diehards. He's lost that. I mean, can we just step back and think about what we've seen, what Elon Musk is really like, and what Donald Trump is really like? Elon Musk was basically accusing Donald Trump of being a pedophile. I mean, and these are the people that are making these key decisions about America's future. I mean, it's just absolutely shocking and depressing and revealing when they kind of rip off the mask. You have this guy who, by Wall Street Journal, New York Times reported heavy drug use. A guy who Wired Magazine reported may very well have lied about his status when he applied for citizenship, in which case it would be grounds for his citizenship being revoked and deported. It's just a completely dark chapter. And what you look
well, it's a dark chapter,
countries,
Stuart, but the fact of the matter is one got elected president of the United States, and one, in spite of everything you just talked about, is the richest man in the world. So where does that leave things?
Well, I think it makes you question the value of being the richest man in the world. Is that the only value? What other sort of human qualities, what sense of decency, of compassion, of basic ability to function as an adult? You know, I think if we become a society where we elevate someone to say, okay, you've made more money than anybody else, therefore we want you to run the country, I think that's a really bad place for this society to be. And there's always been wealthy people involved in American politics, but never like this. And I think Donald Trump won because you had an incumbent president with 40% 40% favorables in the history of America, modern politics. No incumbent party's ever gotten more than 2 points higher than that. The right track of the country was at 27. No incumbent party's ever won with it being under 45. And I don't think that should be confused with an endorsement of Trumpism. If I was Democrats here, I would just raise utter holy hell about this. Clearly, we should take steps to nationalize under the Defense Procurement Act, Starlink, and SpaceX. I mean, this guy is a national security threat of the highest order. And Democrats should feast on this and take it very seriously because it is very serious.
Well, the question is whether or not they can use that effectively, right, Jake? And because there's going to be ads that feature Elon Musk. I don't think anybody's doubting that. But I wonder, big picture, he's publicly mused about starting a third party. He put a ton of money into the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, cheese hat and all. Candidate he backed still lost. So are we just all waiting to see what's going to happen next and what the real influence of Elon Musk is? Or are we kidding ourselves? Anybody with that much money has influence.
Well, sure. I would counter that, though, with like, hey, if Elon wants to light a bunch of money on fire and have a third party that'll get a couple % of the vote every year, you can do it. You know, nothing's stopping him from doing it.
But there's an argument to be made that in a close race, 3% of the vote could switch an election.
And, you know, this is where I think that kind of slapdash coalition that the Trump campaign rather impressively put together with the Elon Silicon Valley component, the RFK Jr. sort of new age wellness, you know, that component. I think we're going to start to see this fall apart thread by thread going into 2028. And that's where it's going to come down to people like J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, who else is going to be eyeing that Republican primary electorate and who might start dabbling with a third party run. I know that Andrew Yang just, you know, had to hop on that train yesterday. And we have Stuart here agreeing with Steve Bannon about nationalizing
deportation,
SpaceX. So, you know, look where we are.
Well, wasn't it Steve Bannon, too, correct me if I'm wrong here, who suggested maybe that President Trump should consider deporting Elon Musk? All right. So, you know, Stuart, I do wonder, what folks outside of the U.S. think about all this. They have a stake in this, too, a pretty significant one. Elon Musk was everywhere with Trump. He was in Saudi Arabia. They saw him at the cabinet meetings. They saw him numerous times in the Oval Office. They heard that he was overnighting in the Lincoln bedroom. What's the rest of the world to make of this and our standing in the world?
Yeah, well, it hurts it. I mean, you see someone who has terrible judgment, that's Elon Musk, and a person who took him inside the beating heart of the American government, and that's Donald Trump. So it's just one more example of why Donald Trump is so unfit to be president, and why this coalition that was put together is unsustainable. But look, what happened here to being a shiny city on a hill? You have one guy accusing the other of being in the Epstein files. You have another that says that he's gone crazy. This is someone who both of them were just praising each other days before. Do you really feel good that one of them has all your data in his pocket and the other has the nuclear codes in his pocket? It's incredibly distressing for America and America's image.
Yeah, and I'm glad you used the word accused of being in the Epstein files, because it is an accusation. Nothing's ever been proved, and Trump has denied any involvement in Epstein's criminal behavior. We're out of time, but I want to ask you really quickly, Jake, what are you watching for next in this?
J.D. Vance.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, he got his paper in before midnight last night with his quick, perfunctory statement in support of Trump, but I'm watching J.D. Vance.
Trump immigration authorities launched a series of targeted raids throughout the city of Los Angeles today. And tonight, a massive protest is taking place outside the L.A. headquarters of ICE. NBC News political and national correspondent Jacob Soboroff is there, and he joins us now. Jacob, I had just gotten a text breaking news notification from the New York Times about this protest, which seems to be quite large. What's going on?
Let me show you, Chris. So these are two protests converging at the same time here. I want to show you this one that's coming from the Metropolitan Detention Center, which is the jail that is run by the federal government, the county and the federal government downtown in downtown L.A. It's converging with this protest. It's coming over here. Scott Killian, why don't you walk with me? Chris, what happened here today in Los Angeles, I think, is the worst nightmare for so many people who live here. You know, Los Angeles is a largely so-called minority-majority city. There are just as many people of color here as there are white people. And in fact, 10% of the population of Los Angeles County, come with me, which is one of the largest counties, the largest by population in the United States, is undocumented. There could be as many as 1 million undocumented people who live here in Los Angeles. And what you saw today, and what all of these people are protesting, is large-scale immigration enforcement raids. What you're looking at on the left-hand side of your screen is this protest from the sky. The helicopters are directly above me. You saw, I'm sorry for the noise, but you saw tactical officers on things like Bearcat vehicles, flashbang grenades on the city streets of Los Angeles, which largely felt like, as some people described in local media, that the military was on the streets of Los Angeles. Historically, the Los Angeles Police Department does not cooperate with immigration enforcement efforts. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department does not cooperate with immigration enforcement efforts. But when you have got ICE in Los Angeles showing up reportedly at Home Depot, where many undocumented people go to get work as day laborers, you know the National Day Laborer Organizing Network well. Many of those people responded in the wake of the fires here in Los Angeles. When you've got ICE showing up outside of places like schools, it quite literally is striking fear into the heart of people all throughout this community. And it is, I think it's fair to say, the worst fear of so many people here who live in Los Angeles and who have heard President Trump threaten that they would do this. But when this day comes on a Friday morning that stretches into a Friday afternoon, people in Los Angeles are mobilizing, and they are very upset. You have Cheerla here, one of the big NGOs here that fights on behalf of immigrant rights. Everybody is out today because obviously this is not to be tolerated by these folks here on the streets of Los Angeles, Chris.
Yeah, and just to be clear here, my understanding of these raids today, these were just workplace. It wasn't like there was some list of people who they suspected were dangerous or guilty of crimes. These were, we've seen more and more of these basically workplace raids, like show up to a place where people are employed and doing a job and go in, right? That was my understanding of what these raids were today.
That's exactly right, Chris. One was in the Fashion District here, just around the corner on Alameda Street, down Alameda Street in downtown Los Angeles. Another one of them was basically, if anybody knows MacArthur Park, at a Home Depot near MacArthur Park. But the big worry here, obviously, is these collateral arrests. And we have heard statements now from the Los Angeles Unified School District, from the Los Angeles Police Department, from the mayor of Los Angeles, from many of the 15 members of the Los Angeles City Council, basically condemning these raids because of what they do to the ordinary person in Los Angeles, which is instill a massive amount of fear. I was talking to a young woman just a few minutes ago who I lost her in the crowd, but her name was Erica Perez. She said her mother was just deported earlier in the week after Erica Perez, has been a firefighter for CAL FIRE, responding to some of the wildfires, not here in LA, but in other places across LA. The bottom line is undocumented people are in every facet of life here in Los Angeles. They are our neighbors, they are our coworkers, they are in our schools. And when something like this happens today, look at these signs. I just want to show you real quick. Scott, come over here. This is the message, and this is what they're worried about. Get ICE out of our schools and our communities, because that is the worst fear, as I said, at the risk of repeating myself, of so many people in the city of Los Angeles. Chris, this is, like I said, probably, in terms of the images and of the feelings people are feeling, maybe not reminiscent of a time of many living, young, undocumented people in Los Angeles, and very scary for so many of them.
Hi there, everybody. It's 4 o'clock in New York. We come on the air with breaking news. A federal grand jury has indicted Kilmar Abrego Garcia. He is the Maryland man and Salvadoran national who was deported by the Trump administration in violation of a court order. He is now being charged with 2 counts: conspiracy to unlawfully transport illegal aliens for financial gains and unlawful transportation of illegal aliens for financial gains. That is according to a copy of the indictment obtained by NBC News. Other news organizations are also reporting that Abrego Garcia is returning home to the United States to face those 2 charges. We should note NBC News has not confirmed that piece of the report. An attorney for Kilmar Abrego Garcia is reacting to the reporting by saying this, quote, "The government disappeared Kilmar to a foreign prison in violation of a court order. Now, after months of delay and secrecy, they are bringing him back, not to correct their error, but to prosecute him. This shows that they were playing games with the court all along. Due process means the chance to defend yourself before you are punished, not after. This is an abuse of power, not justice. The government should put him on trial, yes, but in front of the same immigration judge who heard his case in 2019, which is the ordinary manner of doing things, to ensure that his case is handled as it would have been had he not been improperly sent to El Salvador, as the Supreme Court ordered." Any moment now, Attorney General Pam Bondi will hold a press conference. We actually can confirm now that he has landed in the United States. So knowing that, we are going to listen in to Pam Bondi for a minute.
Conspiracy to commit alien smuggling in violation of Title 8 U.S.C. 1324. We want to thank President Bukele for agreeing to return Abrego Garcia to the United States. Our government presented El Salvador with an arrest warrant, and they agreed to return him to our country. We're grateful to President Bukele for agreeing to return him to our country to face these very serious charges. This is what American justice looks like. Upon completion of his sentence, we anticipate he will be returned to his home country of El Salvador. The grand jury found that over the past 9 years, Abrego Garcia has played a significant role in an alien smuggling ring. They found this was his full-time job, not a contractor. He was a smuggler of humans and children and women. He made over 100 trips, the grand jury found, smuggling people throughout our country, MS-13 members, violent gang terrorist organization members throughout our country. Thousands of illegal aliens were smuggled. This is especially disturbing because Abrego Garcia is also alleged with transporting minor children. The defendant traded the innocence of minor children for profit. There are even more disturbing facts that the grand jury uncovered. It is alleged this defendant is part of the same smuggling ring responsible for the death of more than 50 migrants in 2021 after the tractor trailer overturned in Mexico. This is part of that same ring. The defendant abused undocumented alien females, according to co-conspirators who were under his control while transporting them throughout our country. This defendant trafficked firearms and narcotics throughout our country on multiple occasions. They were using vehicles, SUVs, with added seats in the back, floors that had been ripped out, guns, narcotics, children, women, MS-13 members. That is what the grand jury found. A co-conspirator alleged that the defendant solicited nude photographs and videos of a minor. A co-conspirator also alleges the defendant played a role in the murder of a rival gang member's mother. These facts demonstrate Abrego Garcia is a danger to our community. We want to thank the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, our state and local partners, our acting U.S. Attorney Robert McGuire, and prosecutors from the Joint Task Force Vulcan. Questions?
Attorney General, the traffic stop that we've seen video of from Tennessee, where Abrego Garcia was first identified by the local authorities, at the time, the Homeland Security Department declined to take custody of him. What has happened in between that time and in between the time that the government has been arguing that he was not returnable from El Salvador? What has happened since in this investigation that brought you here?
Yes, the question was in 2021, there was the traffic stop. And what has changed since then? What has changed is Donald Trump is now president of the United States and our borders are again secure. And thanks to the bright light that has been shined on Abrego Garcia, this investigation continued with actually amazing police work. And we were able to track this case and stop this international smuggling ring from continuing.
But these were recently found facts, right?
Yes, okay. Recently found facts.
To that point, can you just explain when this investigation was opened? The investigation in Tennessee, can you say when that investigation was opened?
Well, the grand jury indicted on May 21st. This investigation has been ongoing.
This case has been hotly debated here in Washington. In your mind, does this resolve that issue in terms of his deportation? And should this be seen in any way as complying with the judge's order to return him to the U.S. and the Supreme Court ruling that the U.S. government should facilitate his return?
There's a big difference between what the state of play was before the indictment and after the indictment. And so the reason why he is back and was returned was because there's an arrest warrant, which was presented to the government in El Salvador. So there's a big difference there. As far as whether it makes the ongoing litigation in Maryland moot, I would think so, but we don't know that. He just landed today.
Jake, CBS.
I just want to confirm what you said earlier, that you're intending to prosecute him and keep him in an American prison if he's found guilty, and then would remove him after his sentence is over.
Correct. Yes, he will be prosecuted in our country, sentenced in our country if convicted, and then returned after completion of his sentence.
Last one, Sadie, Wall Street Journal.
Okay. I have two. One's on topic, one's off topic. Maybe I misunderstood you, but you were mentioning, that he had some involvement in a murder, or was connected to groups that had, involved with this other smuggling ring. But to be clear, the only charges he's facing right now are the, human smuggling charges. Just this that's the one offense, but the other things that you have talked about are not actually in the indictment?
No, co-conspirators allege that, and we were clear to say that. He is charged with, it's not only very serious charges of alien smuggling. And again, there were children involved in that. You know, human trafficking, not only in our country, but in our world, is very, very real. It's very dangerous. And as you saw recently in Virginia, the arrest we made of the MS-13 member, unrelated to this, we learned at that press conference, that's where they bring young children into our country and they start grooming them at middle school age to become MS-13 full-fledged members, commit violent crimes throughout our country. It is highly organized. It is very dangerous, and they are living throughout our country, but no more, because they are being arrested, they are being prosecuted, and being convicted and deported when appropriate. That's all for today. Thank you.
We begin right now, though, with Trump, who is known for, if nothing else, his reality star TV instincts. He knows about clashes in media narratives. He knows about how you get attention. But he has found himself out reality showed, at least for a day, by the angry Elon Musk. You might have heard the comparisons now to jilted lovers, to breakups, to divorces, to divestitures. Whatever you want to call it, whatever analogy you want to use, Trump is trying to wrest back control of a political and media cycle that he clearly lost for a minute there, because Musk came out swinging, smearing Donald Trump with all kinds of allegations, some of which we're not going to repeat because we deal in evidence and news, some of which are just political opinions. Musk saying Trump should be impeached after working with him for the first 130 days. Also saying that Trump is basically lying about what's in this big economic bill that is hanging in the balance, and then pushing 4 different narratives back. So Trump is trying to hit back. He called several outlets today, did phone interviews, continued to try to deal with what has clearly spun out of control for him. He alluded to Musk's alleged drug use, something that we should tell you Musk has denied, but was reported in the New York Times regarding last year activities on the campaign trail. Trump reaching out to CNN to say, and tell me if this reminds you of any friend you've ever had telling you they're over something, quote, I'm not even thinking about Elon. The poor guy's got a problem. Not thinking about him, just calling around talking about him. Quote, I won't be speaking to him for a while, I guess, Trump said, and then added, I wish him well. He called ABC News to say, quote, you mean the man who has lost his mind? He went over to Fox, repeating that attack, saying Musk has totally lost it. And the White House is saying Trump doesn't even want that Tesla anymore. The Tesla that he blatantly hawked on the White House lawn. Again, it would all seem like a petty reality show storyline if this wasn't the people's business, but they're putting out word he doesn't want it. MAGA, meanwhile, is in a clash because it's 2 leaders or 2 dads or whatever you want to call it are fighting in a way that doesn't leave it easy for people to pick sides. Remember, there is the Republican Party and all of that sort of official stuff, but then there's the wider MAGA movement, which includes people who come out of broadcasting, podcasting, activism, and a lot of them like Elon Musk. They've certainly spent months with him as the co-pilot, but they also appreciated his money and his activities last year. And so it's not so easy for them to just pick sides, especially with how fast this is unfurled. Take Trump's FBI director, Kash Patel, who has some government experience, but also saw himself as a kind of a mini Musk going around the country, hawking different things, using X constantly. And he ended up learning some of the details about the smears in real time on, of course, appropriately, Joe Rogan's hit podcast.
This is going to come up because it's been going on since we've been recording here. Elon and Trump seem to be in a bit of a spat, Joe. You want to check the tweet that Elon just put out a little bit ago?
Time to drop the really big bomb. Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That's the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day. Jesus Christ.
I'm not participating in any of that conversation
What
between
is he?
Elon
Have
and
a
Trump.
nice day, DJT. Someone should take his phone away.
I'm just staying out of the Trump Elon thing. That's way outside my lane.
What the are they doing?
I know my lane, and that ain't it.
You can say everyone's always performing to some degree, but you can kind of feel the palpable discomfort. Remember, Musk and Trump have been on Joe Rogan's show with some of the most viewed episodes ever, which is the type of thing they track. Common in all media to track that. And Joe Rogan almost doesn't know what to do with it. The FBI director says quite plainly he's not getting involved. Trump has also been pressed about these accusations, although here you'll see the mics go dead.
We're going to have a little discussion now, very private. And I just want to thank you all for being here. And thank you very much, media. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, any response to Elon Musk claiming about the Epstein files?
Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
That's one question this president is not taking. Now, you can see the clear outlines of why this matters, even as there has been so much mockery and sort of people just sort of enjoying aspects of it, or a Schadenfreude aspect of it. But there's a lot of real-world implications. And remember, it began allegedly or ostensibly with Musk being mad about the economic bill, the spending. And he's been pretty blunt, saying he didn't get enough for his companies, which is a reminder that for all the talk of efficiency or cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, the thing that has him the most upset isn't anything he claimed that his agency was about or the fixes he wanted to make for the American people. It didn't take long for him to publicly, blatantly admit that the real dividing line is whether he gets enough money out of the government. And so Republican lawmakers have been stuck with the bill, the bag, the drama of this as they still try to get the original legislation over the finish line.
The blow-up that happened this week was very surprising, disappointing to me.
I think a lot of people said they knew it was inevitable, you know, and here we are.
There's a lot of noise right now.
I don't think lashing out on the internet is the way to handle any kind of disagreement, especially when you have each other's cell phones.
I trust the math from the guy that lands rockets backwards over the politicians.
I tell you what, Elon, this is what I'll do. Come down to Texas 22nd District, right? I'll pay your filing fee and run against me.
I mean, it's just going off the deep end.
He's taken the high ground with Elon and the back and forth online.
The battle between Elon Musk and President Trump has gotten incredibly ugly, and it's deeply, deeply unfortunate.
I hate to see it. I think America hates to see it.
I'm not sure that all of America hates to see it. People have certainly been tuning into aspects of it and feeling like maybe these two people who were so self-interested, who are now fighting over their self-interest, are proving some of the problems with these kind of folks in charge. That's been one of the obvious reactions and criticisms, but you can just see how this is a big problem for Republicans. Musk also clashing with Trump ally Steve Bannon, who called on Trump to both deport Musk, which probably is not lawful based on his status, and also seize one of his companies, SpaceX, which, again, might sound like rhetoric, but we're in a Trump era where they have been breaking rules left and right. So you kind of have to face the music if you want to take it seriously. And remember, these are tools they have threatened others with. Now they're threatening someone that was their ally as of last week. Musk continued to attack online, which is, of course, where he has followers and influence, which drives all kinds of traction, and he bashed Bannon in several posts of his own. Fox News also trying to deal with it.
I don't like it. I want it to stop. I want to tell them if they're both watching, knock it off.
Look, there's nothing anyone can do about it. It makes me sad. You know, it makes a lot of people sad.
Guys fight. Guys sometimes will punch you in the face, and the next night you're having a beer.
I think that Donald Trump and Elon Musk, they'll work it out eventually. They'll become friends again.
Maybe they can patch things up. I mean, Vance called Trump Hitler, and he's on the ticket.
That is true, but it also speaks to the way this has all been so transactional. And this happened in Trump's first term. It's happening again. It is very hard for people to work with, alongside, or for Donald Trump. Junior aides, lawyers, powerful men of industry like Elon Musk. It doesn't seem to matter where you are in the hierarchy or what the project is. We have seen this pattern play out again and again and again. And it raises questions about the fitness of the president. That's why Elon Musk is saying he should be impeached, which is not something that's gained a lot of traction this week. But these are the problems of Donald Trump's decisions and how he works with people. As for the ugliness, there's all kinds of impact. The markets don't like it. Tesla is getting rocked. dropping 14% from Wednesday to Thursday, which on paper means it costs Elon Musk $20 billion in a year where he's already paid a lot on paper for the Trumpification of his brand. Then there's the Trump Technology Group, down 8%, which means they're down about $200 million. And while stock market can be hard to read, a lot of experts say this is a direct response to these two people who are supposed to be adult businessmen and leaders acting like actual total children. Axios reporting the bigger hit to Trump's bottom line, though, was the roughly 10% drop in the meme coin. That would be another $900 million. If you don't think these two are keeping track of this, and it could also eventually quiet them down, and you haven't followed how much grifting is going on, how much crony capitalism has focused the attention of the first 130 days. Now, does Musk really worry about losing all these contracts? What Trump said hasn't started to happen yet, and we have a lot of evidence that it would be complicated to unwind those. Also, if Donald Trump really wanted to cancel those contracts, he shouldn't have said he wanted to do it to hurt Musk. That is exactly the kind of improper purpose which could lead to judicial review or judges pausing any such effort. Now, when you look at those threats, those cuts, Trump's budget director was pressed on this just today.
Is that under serious consideration?
Look, we recognize that Elon benefits from, and his companies benefit from the taxpayer dollars, right? We are trying to put together the best bill for the American people as we possibly can.
It sounds like a yes.
It went back and forth like that. Then there are all the jokes. The Murdoch-owned New York Post went with "I hate my ex" for the cover and a Valentine's Day style breakup. A big, beautiful one at that, while Late Night is having a field day.
Donald Trump and Elon Musk engaged in a very gentlemanly, one might even say scholarly debate on the merits of tax cuts and government spending. And I'm just kidding, they're going at each other.
So now Donald Trump is a Tesla owner who hates Elon Musk? He's never been more relatable.
I knew this day would come, and yet somehow it's even better than I imagined. It's like coming down the stairs on Christmas morning and finding a second tree.
We are witnessing this battle in real time. They're paying for it a lot. The public may be paying for it when you think about all the misplaced energy and priorities. But it's also the question of how we live now.
War between Ukraine and Russia, just one of the topics President Trump discussed with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz yesterday at the White House, with Merz urging Trump to increase pressure on Russia. The German Chancellor also invoked D-Day as an example of another time the United States helped a European ground war, leading to this exchange.
And may I remind you that we are having June 6th tomorrow. This is D-Day anniversary, when the Americans once ended a war in Europe. And I think this is in your hand in specific, in ours.
That was not a pleasant day for you?
No, that was not a pleasant.
This was not a great
in
day.
the long run, Mr. President, this was the liberation of my country from Nazi dictatorship.
That's true.
So,
that's true.
And we know what we owe you. But this is the reason why I'm saying that America is again in a very strong position to do something on this war and ending this war. So let's talk about what we can do jointly.
John Meacham, today is the 81st anniversary of D-Day. Americans and British and Canadian, Australian troops were on the beaches right now, 81 years ago, the beginning of the liberation of Europe from the Nazis. And you heard the German Chancellor yesterday effectively saying, Mr. President, you've missed my point entirely with your one-liner there. I'm trying to explain to you why American influence is so critical today as it was 81 years ago on D-Day.
This is the hinge of the 20th century. It's in many ways the moment, this operation that created a world that could be a post-war world. I think it is a remarkable thing. I think David can shed more light on this than I can, but that's a remarkable moment when the head of government of the former combatant nation, Germany, would talk about that in terms of what we owe you for liberating us from Nazi dictatorship. That's a moment where you really should step back just for a second, and it's beyond Musk, and it's beyond tweets, and it's beyond the things that understandably consume us every day. The images you're showing there are of ordinary Americans who, under Franklin Roosevelt, projected force across the Atlantic, across the Pacific as well, to stand against autocracy, to stand against totalitarianism in a way that, in an era not wholly unlike our own. It's important to remember, as Winston Churchill is alleged to have remarked, that you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing once we've exhausted every other possibility. And World War II is arguably our greatest historical hour, right? It's America using its industrial might, using its moral might, sending its sons to foreign shores to stand up for the principles that were embodied in the Declaration of Independence and in the Atlantic Charter. It's a marvelous story. But let's remember that we got into World War II at the last possible moment. It was after Pearl Harbor. We were attacked in the Pacific, and then Franklin Roosevelt didn't send up a declaration of war until Hitler had declared war on us later that week in 1941. And so politics, history, it seems black and white. It seems simple, simpler anyway. It's not. The men who began to turn the tide of the war, to liberate Europe in these hours 81 years ago, were doing something that makes our lives possible. And I think that example should not, it's so overwhelming that it's almost as if it belongs to a different world. But the reason I mentioned the complicated politics of the era is because they were human too. They almost got it wrong, and then they got it right. And that gives us, I think, hope.
So John is right. D-Day, which we celebrate today, is a day on which the history of the modern world turned. I thought it was very moving to have a German sitting next to President Trump yesterday. I'm not sure Trump fully absorbed what he was saying, you came to rescue us. Didn't rescue Germany, but to rescue the values of Europe and to allow the creation of a modern Europe. I've sat with Joe and others from Morning Joe at that graveyard in Normandy, where the crosses, the grave markers of all those thousands of Americans who died on D-Day are so visible. And you can look at the cliff that they had to climb up to get to the German positions, that the heroism of the individual American, British, and other soldiers who on that day liberated Europe. And I think if there's anything that the German chancellor and other Europeans are trying to say today to President Trump and Americans is, don't forget this heritage. You have been the people who came to the rescue when Europe was facing enormous danger from adversaries like Hitler, and Europeans would say today, like Vladimir Putin. So it's a day to remember what America's done in the past, how grateful people are still for the sacrifices we made.
Yeah, and the chancellor blowing through President Trump's one-liner there to say, no, what I'm saying is you have the power, just like you did on June 6, 1944, to rally to help a European nation. You are still the United States of America, and Europe needs you. The Washington Post, David Ignatius, historian John Meacham. So great to have you both here, especially on this 81st anniversary of D-Day. Thanks, guys.